Hi, this is Lainey Cameron. This is a little bit of a different interview. I have had so many questions about my new audiobook that's coming out for the exit strategy that I thought I'd do something really fun and have Susan Marlowe, who's the narrator of the book, come and talk to me about the whole process of what it's like to be an audiobook narrator and how she selects books to narrate and how all of this works. Thanks for joining me, Susan.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with just the beginning of can you tell me a little bit about your background? How did you get into narrating audiobooks?
So I come from an acting background. I mean, I was doing it more recreationally, but I've been acting since, my middle school days. And I just decided several years ago that I really wanted to work from home. And I was looking for career opportunities to do that. And have been wanting to do voice work for a long time. And so I put something out in social media, kind of picked people's brains, went on the internet, and somehow I stumbled upon an article that led me to ACX, which is the big audiobook hub for specifically independent authors and independent narrators. And I just kind of dug right in, maybe before I should have when I was still learning the craft, but just went in head first and loved it and have just kept up, doing it. That was in 2015. And I think I'm somewhere now around like about 150 books, give or take. I've kind of lost track because I go with different distribution services and so I don't know exactly the number, but
And to give people who are listening a sense, I think I had 50 auditions on ACX. ACX belongs to Amazon. I think it stands for Amazon Audible Exchange, something like that. So it's their way of producing and distributing audiobooks. And I actually went a slightly different path in the end. I went with Findaway, which is another way to distribute your audiobooks, which opens up a few other channels other than ACX. But I had about 50 auditions. And this auditioning process is interesting. People read or they perform a piece of your book that you've given them. And I chose Susan both based on her audition, but also a referral from a friend who was just so pleased with working with you and said you were such a professional, which I can validate you have been. It's been an amazing process. And so you're done selling yourself here because you're really among the best out there.
thank you. That's so nice.
So let's talk about how you got into this a little bit more. Now that you're doing it, you've been doing it for a while. Tell me a little bit about what kind of setup do you have at home? Do you have a full studio, or have you kind of jimmied it together? What does that look like?
It's a little bit of both. I don't have a booth just yet. They are super expensive, and I've kind of been putting that off. So in terms of soundproofing and sound absorption, I have this blanket here. It was actually a quilt I got at IKEA years ago. It's so heavy. And behind it, there's actual soundproofing blankets that I bought. And I'm just kind of in a corner of my room, and I have some acoustic foam facing me, and it's worked pretty well. If somebody's outside mowing the lawn or shoveling, that I can't help. I have to stop and wait for that to stop. But little noises around the house or the neighbors, I don't pick up, which is good. So, yeah, I kind of put together the studio, and then my microphone. Have been consistently upgrading. So I'm working with a Rode NT1. I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but I've been getting pretty decent sound with that, and I'm really happy with it. And I have a studio monitor set up. So I started with headphones, but I found that I was getting too much into the technical part with the headphones. I was hearing every little mouth noise, and it was just affecting my performance. So this is better for me to just go with I just free talk in here.
And how do you decide which books to audition for, right? You actually see a lot of books on ACX and you can choose which ones to put in an audition for. What influences you when you're choosing which books you might be interested in working on?
There's basically, two layers to it. So creatively, I'm going to look for things that are a good fit for me. Um, my voice tends to be, it's lower. I could do young characters, but they have to be kind of angsty or like the badass teenagers. I'm not going to be doing any kind of young ingenue characters. Not for main characters, at least. I could kind of pull that off for secondary characters. So I look and make sure it's a good fit creatively. And then financially, because it's my livelihood, there's two ways to get paid. And this is important for authors when you're putting your book out there. You could either share royalties or you could pay your narrator up front and then you collect all the royalties. So when I look at royalty share books, I'm really looking at how well I think the book will sell, how marketable it is, the author's online presence, do they have a lot of followers? Do they put out a lot of content, etc.?
So what do you enjoy about your role, and what's the hardest part of narrating?
What I enjoy most as an actor and as a writer, I'm sure, this will speak to you as well, is just it's our job to story tell, right? So you're creating a story and I'm presenting the story. And, I've worked as an actor on stage, I've worked as an actor behind the mic, I've worked as a director, I've written before, I've done like some playwriting. So I just love this idea of connecting with people through stories. We've been doing this since the beginning of time, right? We've been oral tradition. Stories are kind of what keeps us going as humans. It's part of the human experience to kind of hold this mirror up to us. So this is a great outlet for me to be able to do that. The hardest part, I think the hardest part is as an actor, whether I'm working behind the mic or whether I'm on stage, there's kind of this two parts to it where you're kind of letting go and really connecting with the characters, with the story. But there's also part of you plugged into this technical aspect of like, uh, is my voice consistent with that character? Was that a weird noise my voice made? Am I too loud now? Am I too soft? And so kind of finding that balance where you are not getting so in your head about the technical, or you're so in touch with the character that you're not actually it becomes too internal, and then you're not sharing it with your audience, which is
I
the
think
goal.
writers could relate to that, right? It's kind of like the difference between writing and editing. When you're writing, you want to be creative and you don't want to let your other side of your brain, your analytical side, get in the way when you're trying to create. And then there's a point where you're being like analytical and you're saying, did this work and what should it be and how do I improve it? So it seems like a very similar analogy. I love how you refer to it as the storytelling aspect of it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, I think there's so many similarities between writing and acting. I mean, you are creating characters, and that's what actors do, right?
So tell me more about that, because you put on different voices, and I noticed several times when you and I were going back and forth that you call it performing, not narrating. I actually noticed that little difference in wording. So like, how do you decide like what voices to do for different characters?
Usually, when I read the book before I narrate it. So usually when I'm reading it beforehand, I get a really strong sense of the characters while I'm reading it, and I could kind of hear their voices in my head. Doesn't always come out of my mouth the way I want it to, but you know, best laid plans. Um, but I kind of have that in my head and hope to get that out. And one thing that I struggled with early on that I consistently work on is it's kind of going back to what I said before, but the technical versus, just kind of letting go is just be true to the character and be true to the dialogue. And even if the voice isn't exactly the same on the next line, as long as it's true to the character, it's okay. Everyone will know. Because you could really get like, oh no, I'm, half a note up higher on this than I was. So that's something that I work with a lot, is just kind of like, it's okay if it's not 100% perfect, as long as the characters are there consistently.
So tell me about the process, because I suspect, like writing, that people hear the end product and they think that you just, get a microphone, read the book and send it over and you're done. And I think very similar to writing, there's a lot that happens between the first attempt at reading the book and the thing that goes to the author, and then the thing that gets published. Talk to me a little bit how that process works.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised how many hours go into a finished hour of audio. Um, for me, when I get the book, I generally will ask the author or rights holder, do you have any character notes? I like to know what their vision is for it and try and stay as consistent as possible to that. And then I read that with that, and I read the story with that in mind. Um, and while I'm reading, if there's any words I'm unfamiliar with, I'll jot them down. I'll look up pronunciations, all those kind of fun logistical things. And then when I record, I if I make a mistake, I go back and fix it in real time. And then I do my own editing and mastering. Some narrators will send it out to an editor, but I'm still kind of enjoying that part. And I'm kind of, I don't know, like these are my babies. I don't want to send out these files. Like I want to tweak the timing and stuff. But um, so after I narrate it, I edit it for like spaces, weird noises that got in that I didn't realize. And then I listen to it again. So by the time I'm done, I have either read, recorded, or listened to the story about 4 times, 4 or 5 times. So I'm really familiar with it by the
And then
end.
the author also has a say, right? So then you,
Yeah.
in this case, like you send it to me, and I listen to 12 hours of audio, and I
Yep.
pick up on anything that's either incorrectly said, or the pronunciation's not the way I expected it to be,
Hmm.
or I mean, we had very few. I think in total, you only had to fix like 10 or 20 things. I mean, it was tiny, tiny for 12 hours of audio. But
Yeah.
I imagine sometimes that must be really hard, right? If the author has something in their head that they wanted it said a certain way. I mean, you nailed it as far as I was concerned, but like, does it ever get really tricky that last stage?
It hasn't so far for me. It's good to kind of set the expectation up front. You do like a first 15-minute sample, and it doesn't actually have to be the first 15 minutes of the book. So you could say, what characters do you want to hear? And you really work out um, what the author wants and try and get as close to that as possible. And I think a lot of authors realize that it's never going to sound exactly as they think it will in their head, and that's normal. I mean, it's the same with script writers and playwriters, right? You write something and then you hand over creative control, but that's where the audition process comes in. You want to get somebody who matches closest to you. So I've been pretty lucky that that part hasn't been too tricky. The hardest part of that is the technical part, is getting those edits in and making it sound like it was part of the original recording.
I was
um,
amazed that you did that. Like, we had little pieces that were like tiny words, and you managed to like change the sentence, and you couldn't tell that it was ever any different. Like, that must be quite the skill.
yeah, it's taken me a while to get to that point. And every so often it still could be really hard. I mean, I listen to a ton of audiobooks and I could sometimes pick up too. I'll be like, oh, that's a pickup. That was not in the original recording.
And a
So,
pickup is that, that's a term people might not be familiar with. So the
oh
pickup is
yeah.
that last
So
piece.
changes at the end are called pickups. I don't know why, but yeah.
So this is a great bridge to my last question for you here before we wrap up, which is advice. Do you have any advice for writers? Let's start with writers who are looking to produce their audiobook. Any advice you would give to people who are maybe doing it like me for the first time?
I would say crowdsource other authors who have done it and find what's going to work best from a distribution standpoint. Um, that's not really my end, so I don't know too much, but I know there are tons of ways to distribute. You went through Find a Way, there's ACX, there's a whole bunch of ways out there that you could distribute your book. So I would crowdsource on social media and listen to the auditions, and again, be willing to give up some creative control, um, and just make sure that you are setting your intentions clear from the beginning, because that's how things get kind of wonky at the end if there's a miscommunication. Um, Yeah, I think
That's a
that's
great way
it.
to say it. And what about someone who wants to get into audio narrating for the first time, who's thinking this might be a career for them? Like, if you rewind yourself to when you were starting out, what advice would you give past you?
I would say don't dive in head first like I did. Take time to really do your research. There's tons of information out there. I mean, even just the ACX website has tons of articles and information for narrators, for authors too. So that's a good resource for either end. There are groups on Facebook that will give you some advice on how to get started, coaches. Um, I felt like there was one more thing. Oh, and listen to a ton of audiobooks. That's been my biggest help. Know what people are doing in the industry, know what works, what doesn't work. Listen to it for fun, but listen to it with an ear towards the craft itself.
Isn't that interesting how much it reflects the writer world of, our big advice to writers is read a lot, because that'll help
Yeah.
you understand what works. So same logic. I love it.
Yeah.
So any last thoughts or anything we haven't asked you about before we wrap up?
No, I think I've covered a lot.
Yeah, if
Um,
anyone has questions for me about how to pick, a narrator, or the process I went through, or why I went with Find a Way, feel free to ask me. I mean, for me, just to give you the short version, I wanted to be on open distribution because I really cared about the audiobook being available to libraries. And that was going to be
mhm.
easier for me with Find a Way than if I'd gone with ACX. And so that was the main driver for me in going that path. This has been fun, and thank you again for narrating the exit strategy. I am so happy with how it turned out. Really, it was such a joy listening to it and hearing it narrated, like hearing the words the way a reader might have heard them, as opposed to the way I thought they were. And it's fun because, like, once you put this in the world, you don't own that thing anymore. It becomes the reader's thing, right? It's like with
Right.
any book, right? Everybody
Mhm.
reads from their own experience. And so this for me was just a joy to hear someone else kind of living my story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great book. I hope people pick it up.
Oh, thank
Audio,
you.
ebook, I mean, it's a fantastic story. It's very topical right now. I love that the two main characters are female. It's really a testament to the strength of friendship and I don't know. I was really
Thank you.
proud to get to narrate it. So
Oh,
thank
thank
you.
you. Well, thanks for doing this interview with me. And here's hoping it's a fun book and people enjoy it as an audio. Thanks so much.
Bye.